Let's look at some of the specifics of the AfCFTA. It covers a market of 1.3 billion people. Current figures, we're looking at 2.4 billion by 2050 and about over 4 billion people by 2100. We're looking at a GDP of $3.4 trillion across within the 55 member states of the AU. Bearing in mind there are 54 acknowledged countries. It will be the 8th trading bloc in the world, and in terms of numbers of participating countries, it is the world's largest free trade area since the formation of the WTO. Hopefully, by 2030, the Africa GDP forecast is that it will increase from the current 3.4 trillion to 6.7 trillion. Now, the scope exceeds typically that of the traditional free trade area. It is complemented by other initiatives, including then the protocol on the free movement of people, the right to residence, the right to establishment, and then a single African air transport market. Now, in concrete terms, what does this mean? It means that African businesses, traders, and consumers will pay no tariffs on a large variety of goods traded in African countries. Traders can request the removal of non-tariff barriers. Cooperation between customs authorities will facilitate the flow of goods. Service providers will have access to the markets of all African countries on, very importantly, terms no less favorable than domestic suppliers. And then the mutual recognition of standards, licensing, and certification of service providers will make it easier for businesses and individuals to satisfy the regulatory requirements of operating in others' markets. Furthermore, the easing of trade between African countries will facilitate the establishment of regional value chains in which inputs are sourced from different African countries, instead of importing them to add value before exporting externally. States will have recourse to trade remedies to ensure that domestic industries can be safeguarded if necessary. There's a dispute settlement mechanism, which gives the AfCFTA some teeth. And then upon conclusion, phase 2 negotiations will provide a more conducive environment for recognizing African intellectual property rights, facilitating Africa or intra-Africa investment, and addressing anti-competitive challenges. Now, the effect of these projections that I've given you, the removal of the tariff on goods will increase the value of intra-Africa trade between 15% or $50 billion and 25% or $70 billion by 2030. I'll get back to these figures just now. Alternatively, intra-Africa trade will increase by nearly 40 to more than 50% by 2040, just 10 years later. United Nations Economic Commission for Africa states that the AfCFTA can boost intra-Africa trade by 52.3% by eliminating import duties, and double this trade if non-tariff barriers are also reduced. It will lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty, and the GDP of most African countries could rise by between 1 to 3% once all tariffs are removed. In addition, manufacturing will create 16 million new jobs, more jobs for youth and increased entrepreneurship opportunities. The youth hopefully then will benefit from the AfCFTA protocol on e-commerce, which underscores the importance of the digital economy. I spoke about the 15 to 25%, 50 billion to 70 billion increase. Now, if we look only at $50 billion increase, this increase will form the 12th largest economy in Africa. Only the increase, equivalent to the combined GDP of the bottom 17 states in Africa. At 70 billion, the increase would be the 9th largest economy in Africa, slightly more than combined GDP of the bottom 18 states in Africa. This is based on last year's GDP figures. One element that is very important and is receiving a lot of attention is the Pan-African payment and settlement system as part of the AfCFTA. Currently, if you want to trade within Africa, you need to convert into either dollars or euros or pounds, which costs the African continent a lot of money. Now, with the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, collaboration with central banks will facilitate direct translations among the more than 40 currencies used in Africa. So I can sit in Ghana, I can buy something in Kenya, but I can pay in the currency in Ghana, and the person in Kenya will receive according to the converted figure in Kenyan shillings. This currency conversion cost saving in Africa amounts to $5 billion annually, US dollars annually, which is larger than the GDP of 15 countries in Africa. It was launched for commercial use on January 2022, 13th of January to be specific, and it had a successful pilot in 6 West African states. It is driven by the AfCFTA Secretariat, the African Export-Import Bank, and the African Union, and supports 3 core functions: the instant payment, pre-funding, and net settlement. Now, when we look at the progress of the AfCFTA, remembering that the operational phase of the AfCFTA was launched during the 12th or the extraordinary session of the Assembly of the Union on the AfCFTA in 2019, 7th of July. The formal start of trading under the AfCFTA agreement began on 1 January 2021. By September 2022, not a single trade had taken place. Fortunately, this changed due to what we call the African Trade Initiative, the guided trade initiative rather. On 23 September 2022, Kenyan-made Exide batteries arrived in Ghana under the AfCFTA, which is then the first trade that we see. The trade resulted from the initiative by the AfCFTA when it realized that despite the 1st of January 2021 marking the start of trade, no trading had taken place. So the GTI was launched officially in Accra on the 7th of October 2022, and which symbolizes the start of commercially meaningful trade. 8 countries were selected to test commerce in the AfCFTA, i.e. Cameroon, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Mauritius, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Tunisia. Now, the AfCFTA Secretariat will now assist the countries to test the trading documents and the procedures of the AfCFTA on pre-selected goods shipments among these countries that I've mentioned. The GTI identified 96 products, including tea, coffee, processed meat, sugar, and dried fruits, to be traded amongst these participating countries. This number, 96, is set to increase threefold as the number of participating countries increases. There are still a number of challenges to this AfCFTA. The inability of political leaders to place regional interest above national interest. Tariffs are a major source of income for many states, and now they are expected to let go of this. Conflict throughout Africa is a major source of concern, as is poor infrastructure. The disparate size of economies, sitting with a very small economy on the one hand, and then sitting with the big economies like Egypt, Nigeria, and South Africa. Corruption, unfortunately, is still an issue that needs to be worked upon. And then the whole thing of inertia, things have not started to move yet. Fortunately, as I've said, the GTI, though the Guided Trade Initiative, has something to do in this regard to promote trade. Opportunities. What opportunities are there in Africa for or under the auspices of the AfCFTA? In agriculture, you're looking at horticulture, floriculture, poultry, cattle, sheep, fish, rice, cassava, maize, avocados, too many to mention. Manufacturing, textile and apparel, motor vehicle manufacturing and assembling, leather, food processing, basically value addition in general. The reality is Africa exports raw materials just to import the value-added product later at a much higher cost. Oil, big issue, a big example on this phenomenon. Soaps and detergents. In Rwanda, the market demand for plus minus 50 million US dollars, with an estimated domestic production of 15 to 20 million, only about 40% of the total market. This is a simple product, and this phenomenon actually manifests throughout Africa. Pharmaceutical. Approximately 90% of demand is important, a demand which is mostly generic medication, something which needs to be given attention to sooner rather than later. In the field of retail and e-commerce, the formal sector, or what they call modern retail, hugely underrepresented. In terms of e-commerce, a lot of big players are manifesting themselves, hosting themselves, positioning themselves in Africa. Alibaba, you have Amazon, obviously, African retail e-commerce companies. You have Jumia, you have Kilimall, you have, amongst others, also from the Dubai, you have Dubai.com, which has manifested itself in Rwanda, moving into East Africa and looking to move into West and Southern Africa as well. Digital, mobile money, health, agriculture, entertainment, education, renewable energy, production of renewable energy materials, batteries, solar panels in Africa, and then also putting up micro and nanogrids. Infrastructure, I referred to that early on. Roads, railways, ports, airports, water, electricity, these need serious attention and present huge opportunities for organizations from outside. Tourism, the full value chain per se, provides wonderful opportunities. In conclusion, the AfCFTA has the potential to boost the wealth and the quality of life of all Africans in a major way. The structures are now in place. A couple of things need to be done. Spoken about the issue of infrastructure and the willingness to subordinate national interest to regional interest. Future focus for now must be on implementation. We need to move beyond formulating plans to putting the plans into place and making them work. Short and sweet, that's the AfCFTA.